Do you know how a fly line gets standardized? Or gets assessed, you know, it's a 5-weight, 6-weight? Well, the designer goes out and he puts a line on, he says, yeah, that feels like a 5. So there is no standardization at all for fly rods. And I'll tell you a little bit about the standardization for fly lines. So this right here is a, product pointer. Use that. So this is a full flex rod. As you can see, flexes all the way down. This is a mid flex, or a moderate fast. And this is one that just flexes up here. It's a tip flex, okay? Now, what if I told you, and this is slow, or this is fast action, this is slow action. So these are markedly different fly rods, aren't they? What if I told you you could do this with the same fly rod in different fly lines? And that's what we'll talk about tonight. I'm going to give you a lot of information now. So you may feel like that during the talk, and if you do, just stop me. Two things I want to mention. One is that we're going to have a fly casting fair. The Washington State Council has had a fair, fly fishing fair, in Ellensburg for the last 13 years. This year we're going to change it up. We're going to come to this side of the Cascades because about 60 to 70% of the members of FFI and the Washington Council are on west of the Cascades. It's going to be May 2nd, about 9 a.m. There's going to be casting demos. There's going to be a walk-in casting clinic so you can go in and work with a certified instructor. There's going to be workshops where you can actually take a class on a specific topic. There's going to be a casting challenge course, which I'll talk about in a second. And at 6 that night, we're going to have a banquet at the Mercer Island Community Center. This is going to be at Luther Burbank Park. Anybody familiar with Luther Burbank Park on Mercer Island? It's really a neat place. So we're going to have casting demos at 11 and 3 by Molly Simonek and Don Simonson, and then the workshops that you can sign up, and these are the people who are giving them. And then individual casting opportunities. So if you come, May 2nd, bring your fly rod because we'll have the casting challenge up, and that's going to be run by the Overlay Club. And then we'll have walk-in clinics where you can get somebody to work on your problem with your casting. And the casting challenge, the skills challenge, is something I actually helped write. There are 4 of us working on this. And it's designed for experienced beginning fishermen, fly fishers, okay? Not just somebody who just goes out and buys a rod and walks to the lake, but somebody who's still kind of a beginner, but has some experience. Intermediate and advanced fishermen. It's free and it's available to anyone. It's on our website. You can just go get it if you want. It's fun. It's a voluntary way. You can practice. You can challenge yourself in a progressive manner. It's great for club events. If your club has a picnic, it's great. You can set up these really easy courses to set up, and you can have events. And if you're interested, you can take and send your information in and get recognized by the FFI. So that's the gold challenge. So there's a bronze, silver, and gold. That's the pin you can get. And each of these progressive bronze, silver, gold is directly applicable to increasingly difficult fishing situations.
What's your website?
The FFI website is flyfishersinternational.org.
Okay.
And I'll put a slide up here in just a second with that. So here's the tasks that they've got in the bronze, silver, and gold. And you can see that it starts relatively easy, 50-foot cast, targets at 20, 30, 40. You got to be able to shoot line a little bit. You gotta be able to do a roll cast. 40 feet roll cast on the grass is pretty hard, so you need to work on that one. The silver adds a little bit more. The targets now have to be hit with the non-dominant hand, so if you're right-handed, you have to do them with your left hand. You have to do reach bends and slackline presentation in a Belgian cast. So this is 50 feet distance you have to do. You have to do 60 for the silver, and for the gold, you have to do 70. And we added an extra target, 50 feet. 50 feet is pretty challenging. So this really is a challenging test to be able to do the gold. If you can do the gold, you're well on your way to the CI. But this is not a certification; it's more your own development.
So what rod should I bring to be able to get a 70-foot cast? Can I bring my 9 weight?
You could bring your 12 weight.
Oh, okay.
It really doesn't matter.
2 weight.
If you could do 70 feet with a 2 weight,
Well, that's what I was
Going
going
forward.
to ask.
You're a real man.
that's right.
Teaching the class.
So this is flyfishersinternational.org. Did I say .com?
No, you said.
No, you said that org.
And the reason I'm showing you this is the home page, and up here, when you're trying to find this challenge, there's an education section and a casting section, and everybody goes to the casting section, and you can't find it there because it's not there. It's under education, and it's casting under education. And this is the page for the skills challenge, and you can get each one of the challenges, and there's a facilitator's guide. Yes?
Do you have to be a member to access that site?
No, it's free for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? And then if you do want to get recognized and get a certificate and a pin, you do have to be a member of the FFI, and there's a fee for that, obviously. But this is great. Anytime we've had it, people just come out of it just fantastically happy about what they've been able to document. You know, hey, you know, I can really say that I can do this, and it really works to people's advantage when they go fishing. So, any more questions on that before we go into the main part here? So, the fly fishing system. Rod, line, leader, tippet, and the fly. And there's been an overemphasis on rods. You know, rods are just what everybody wants to have. And many of the problems that people have that they'll attribute to this rod, I don't like this rod. It's not the rod, they're using the wrong line. Okay? You can't throw a big streamer with a trout line. It just won't work. And casting ability is obviously more important than a rod. When you mentioned that do 70 feet with a 2 weight, there are people who can probably do that. I have a friend, a guy named Bruce Richards, who actually wrote the book that I use for a lot of this on fly lines, who I've seen do 128 feet with a 5 weight rod. So, you know, let's.
Is that illegal?
Does he use an off-the-shelf line, or did he construct a line?
No, they were using, and in fact, when I saw him do that, they were supposed to bring special lines for everybody to use, and they didn't have them. Somebody didn't bring them, so I just went and got a bunch of lines at a fly shop and used them.
Wow.
Wow.
So he's incredible. He's probably the best teacher in the world as far as teaching fly casting. He's in Bozeman and Ennis. He lives between Bozeman and Ennis. So simple changes of a fly line can markedly impact the rod action. And different lines, having a few different lines can take a utility fly rod and make it a real team. Now this was an ad that came out this a few years ago. You may have seen this. The Sims, they have 6 single-hand rod cannon, which has room for 1 reel. This is backwards. You should have 1 rod and and 6 lines. Now, everybody complains, oh, my fly line's $100. Well, we'll talk about why some of those prices and stuff are, but if you got 1 rod and you got 3 or 4 lines, okay, that's cheaper than having 3 or 4 rods. So it makes sense to get the right line for what you're doing. And this is just kind of the general structure of what a fly line is. It's got a central core, and then there's a layer outside of that. So this is the central core here, the braided core. Then you've got this inner level, and these indentation things here are actually glass, little glass bubbles like that add air to it, so it'll float if it's a floating line. And if it's a sinking line, then what do they put in there?
Tungsten?
Tungsten, not lead anymore. Nobody makes lead lines anymore. And then on the outside is a hard outer one, and that outer layer is where oftentimes they have special lubricants in it. They'll have stuff that keeps it from degrading in ultraviolet light and those kind of things. So, what line should you get? So the most important thing is, what are you fishing for and what technique you're going to use? It takes a totally different line to do a dry fly versus a streamer or even a nymph, but you can use the same rod to do that if you have the right lines. How far are you going to be casting? What kind of mins will you be doing? How do you want the fly to land? Is it going to flop like that, you know, right next to the end of the bank? Or do you want a nice, gentle land? And on and on. So, here's that same picture we showed. So here it is, quote, medium action. It bends down to right about here. And if you overline it, then it becomes much more bent. Meaning overline. So let's say this is a 5-weight rod, you have a 5-weight line on it. If you put a 7-weight on it, it'll look like this. Oops, what happened there? If you underline it, so you've got a 5-weight and you put a 3-weight line on it, it's just going to bend the tip. When I did my master's, when I was preparing for my master's, I really didn't have as smooth a cast as I wanted. So one of the things I did is I had an old Scientific Angler's kit. I think I paid $100 for it. It was rod, reel, line, leader. It's kind of a mid full flex rod, and it was a 5-weight, and I put an 8-weight line on it. Okay, and that made me slow down when I cast, and I really was able to smooth out my casting with that. So you really can't put a lot of different lines on the same rod. Now I mentioned that fly lines have a standardization. And the reason they had to do that is because the old silk lines were standardized essentially by the number of fibers in it. Okay? And then they came out with the plastic lines in the 50s, and that didn't work because it didn't relate to the number of fibers that you had. So they came up with this, then AFTMA, it's now no longer around anymore, but there's another organization that's taken it. So the AFTMA number goes from 1 to 15, okay? And then the weight, it's of the first 30 feet of the line, not the entire line, just the first 30 feet. So if something is a 3-weight and it conforms to the standards, I mean there's no police out there to say you have to, so not everybody does, but in general, so a 3-weight's going to weigh 100 grains at 30 feet. And an 8-weight's going to weigh about 210. And probably most of you use 5 weights, and that's about 140. So what's a grain? Does a grain mean anything to you? Maybe if you're not a reloader, it probably is. Well, it was named after barley. So each one of those is a grain. Okay, each one of those little barley things is a grain. So that doesn't make much sense. I mean, you know. So let's look at maybe grams. Now I'm sure most everybody in high school dealt with grams a little bit, you know, and in college, but you know, still, how much is 13 grams? I don't know. But I think one of the things that's made us a little bit more cognizant of what a gram is. So this is 3.5 grams. But still, it's really hard to relate that to a lot of stuff. So this bag would be just about equivalent to a 1 weight for the first 30 feet. And then how about ounces? We know an ounce. Tell me something besides an ounce of water that weighs an ounce. That's what I thought. Yep, we don't know it. So a quarter weighs about 1/4 of an ounce. That's kind of easy thing. So that is right about a 3 weight. A 7 weight is about, the first 30 feet weigh about as much as 2/4. Now, to get all the way up to an ounce, okay, a full ounce, which is about what a piece of bread weighs, okay, you're up around 13, 14 weight. We think of those as really big, heavy things, but there really isn't all that much weight in those lines. And a standard business card weighs 22 grains, okay? And up until weight, the 6 weight, it's 20 grains between each one of these weights. So the difference between a 3 weight and a 4 weight is a business card. Okay? Not very much. Okay, any questions on that? Does that make sense?
When you're saying, wait, are you saying the first 30 feet of an 8-weight line weighs 0.55 of an ounce?
Weighs what?
The chart. I just copied it down and I looked at it.
Okay, so you say about an 8 is 240 grains.
But in ounces,
210.
Yeah. Grams. Oh, in ounces. Oh, no. An 8 weight in ounces is about half.
well, half.
Yeah.
Well,
Half
half
ounce.
an ounce
Half an
for
ounce.
30 feet?
For 30 feet.
That's astonishing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Particularly when you watch people cast like this. Okay?
You know, me.
Okay. So, thanks for asking that and clarifying that. Any other questions? Good. So let's talk about mass versus density. So, 1 ounce stretched over 30 feet isn't very much, or if you put it in a little ball of lead, it's going to be a lot smaller. So it's the density, okay? So for the same line weight, the mass, sinking lines have a smaller diameter. So they have higher density, so they sink. Okay? Now one of the problems here is that smaller lines, thinner floating lines don't float as well because they have thinner coating material. Okay, so there's less to hold them up. And conversely, low weight sinking lines don't sink well. You know, if you have a 3 weight sinking line and you lay it out there, it may just float because there just isn't much weight, much density in it to get it to sink. Now, having said that, there's a lot of limitations in what you can do with density. Very low density lines would have a very large diameter. Okay? And would make it a lot harder to cast. So a 5-weight might feel like a 7-weight. Okay? And so, so you get very, very low density, plus all the floating additives and stuff will make it deteriorate. It just isn't as strong. So, as I said, there's no standards for rods. There kind of is for lines, and we'll talk about that in a second. And there's no standards for sink rates. Okay? So you see all these, you know, floating line type 1, type 2, type 3, type 6, whatever. The way they measure that is they take 2 feet of fly line of a sinking line, and they put it like an aquarium and watch it sink and time it. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't typically float with a disconnected 2-foot segment of line in an aquarium. Because you're hooked up to the rod, you've got fly and stuff on the end of it. It just doesn't necessarily pertain to what this is. Now, progressively, if you look at it, you know, a type 6 is going to sink faster than a type 1, but you really can't too much go by the numbers because there's no standardization. And one company's, you know, type 6 is going to sink differently than another company's type 6. Probably one of the most important things in sinking lines is to have a uniform sink rate. And they're designed with where the weight is in it, where the density is, so you've got a nice straight line down to the end of the fly line and then the leader. If you don't have a uniform sink, you're going to have this swoop here because of the fact that there's less coating on the tip. So the tip is going to float up a little bit higher, and the main body is going to sink down further. And one of the companies, which I won't name, Rio, has this big thing about having, you know, minimal stretch in the core, and that it lets you feel the fish better. Well, I hate to tell you, but I'm not sure that with this you could feel anything when that gets taken. So it's much better to have a straight one.
So Bill, when I go to buy a fly line, how can I tell whether it's gonna have the uniform sink?
Yeah, so you can go online, look at their website and stuff, and it'll tell you whether it's a uniform sink line.
Are all uniform sink lines
Uniform?
pretty much the same?
Again, you've still got the same
Yeah.
variability in their sink rate, but they will tend to have a straight line.
They will,
Yeah.
okay.
So, we'll talk about naming fly lines, fly line nomenclature. So, off to the left is the taper, and there's a L for level, D for double taper, WF for weight forward, ST for shooting taper, and then the buoyancy, they're either floating, sinking, or they're floating with a sink tip, or they're intermediate. So this line right here would be a
Wait forward.
weight forward,
Floater.
right, and this one,
Double taper. Sinking.
great, and this one,
Wait forward. Five. Floating, sinking.
yeah, yeah, with sink tip, okay? So, pretty simple, and the lines now, most of them, have got printed on them what the line is. Remember how you look, you pick up a reel and go, oh shit, what is this? You know? That's another one of those kind of greenish lines. I wonder what it was. Well, now, most of the lines actually tell you what the line name is, what the weight is, et cetera. So it's a lot better. But,
I just have a small question. It's something I've assumed, that I'm not so sure it's correct. But if you have a rapid sinking line and an intermediate sinking line, if you wait long enough, will the intermediate sink line reach the bottom a little slower than the rapid sink line?
probably a lot slower, but yes.
Okay,
Ultimately,
In other words,
all
if you're
sinking
patient-
lines sink,
go,
okay? It's just how fast they sink.
yeah, so you get a chance at that, okay.
So you hear people throw around taper or profile, and it's kind of hard to tell what does that mean. So double taper means that there's a taper in the front and the back. Two tapers, double taper. Do you know why we have double taper lines?
Switch them around and have a new reverse line.
Oh, because the silk lines used to get wet on the front end, they'd reverse them.
That's right. And also, that was supposed to make them last longer too.
Yeah, true.
Would spread the wear out. And one of the things that people just said was reversing the line. And you can do that. It really doesn't make any difference with a double taper as far as reversing it for wearing out. You're gonna wear it out even if you just use one end. What is gonna wear that out is that all of the chemicals in the coating are gonna get off gas. When they do it, it's gonna start cracking, and when that happens, it's gonna be the whole line. So the ability of being able to turn around a double taper line to make it last longer really doesn't have that much impact.
It's better for mending though, huh?
Yeah, and we'll get into that. That's a very good point. And why is it better for mending?
Because it's the whole line weighs the same amount, except for, with the weight forward, you got a skinny line trying to throw a heavy line away. And it's,
So how far do you normally cast?
200 feet or so.
I don't know.
Or 20.
I don't know if they,
Well,
in the wind.
yeah.
If the boat's running.
We'll get into that, but the truth is that that's very true. You're gonna be able to mend the entire, if you have 70 feet of this out, you can still mend it. But the problem is you're not gonna get 70 feet out because, most people aren't, because what makes the weight forward one so much better is that you have this running line back here that's small, okay? And that has two impacts. One is it has less resistance in the guides, and two, it has less mass you're trying to pull. So this right here is pulling less mass through the guides. And here, you've got as much mass in back as you do in front. So you're pulling all that line out. This is a weight forward taper, and this is the profile from taper to taper. So this profile was from taper to taper, and this one is from taper to taper. And there's thin running line back here. And oftentimes there's these complex tapers where they'll have 2 or 3 or even 4 tapers in the tip of it to impact how it casts. I know one of the big things is some people say, well, if you're doing the Henry's fork, you got to use a double taper because it has such a gentle presentation. Well, presentation is not related to whether it's a double taper or single taper at all. It's related to the distal taper. We'll talk about that again in a second. So here we have some fly line profiles and tapers. Level, you don't find much of level lines anymore. This is the double taper we just talked about. This is the weight forward with the running line back here. This is the triangle taper. Anybody have a triangle taper? Okay, this was
The wolf, right?
the wolf taper.
I
Yeah.
have it, yeah.
Yeah, And this really is a pretty good one for roll casting and stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. This is the teeny, which has got, you know, no taper on the front, but it does have running line back here. And anybody fish with teeny lines? Yeah. So what happens with the fly with the teeny?
Yeah,
You know?
well,
It pops.
I use the sinker
Yeah.
line. Yeah, they
So
flop.
it really plops down, and that's because this tip doesn't have a taper. And then a shooting head
Big fat nerve.
with the running line or shooting line
Steel
behind it,
plugs,
and it
yeah.
can be attached or separate.
I must have teeny the way my flies land.
Could be.
The other thing that double tapers were good for a while was when you cut them up to make shooting heads before they had shooting head fly lines.
Exactly. So, now, I'm not gonna take too much time with this physics, but if you notice, no. The only thing I want you to know about for the physics is this equation. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared. Okay? Now, let's make that equation useful. Velocity equals 2 times the energy divided by the mass. How can that be more useful? Well, what this means is, first of all, if anything happens that changes the mass and the velocity, they're inversely related, okay? And for every change in the mass, the change in the velocity is squared, okay? So that means a lot. So if your mass goes down, your velocity goes way up because it's squared. If the mass goes up, the velocity goes down. So when you have a lot of mass, it's going to be slower, and it's going to carry those heavy lines, those heavy flies, streamers and such. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so we're talking right now, this is a wait forward line, and we're starting our cast. This is the fly rod, this is the line, it tapers, and then the leader is out here. So the cast starts, and you're going to go this way, and all the energy is in the rod leg. When you start your forward cast, all of that energy is in the rod leg. The rod leg is the bottom leg and the fly leg is the top. Gee, could that be because one's connected to the fly and the other's to the rod? I think so. So in this case, it's all rod leg. Everything is connected to the rod. And then you stop, you begin to form a loop, and the line begins to go out. And as it goes out, this mass is decreasing as it comes to the front. So you get stop and loop formation, your rod leg is still static, and this part's moving, rod leg is still static, and this part's moving, rod leg is still static, and this part's moving. Again, all the energy's in the fly leg. We're going to go back to this, remember, if mass goes down, velocity is going to go up by the square. So now you've got your mass decreasing, so the line is accelerating, right, at the square of the decrease in the mass, and it continues to this, and it goes so fast that air resistance slows it down. It's counterintuitive. But even though it's going faster, it ends up being slowed down because of the air resistance. And because of that, when you have a big loss of mass, when you have a big taper, the energy is dissipated and you get a nice, gentle presentation. I know that doesn't seem to make any sense, but it's what happens. One of the ways to make that make a little bit more sense, how fast do you think the tip of a fly line would go if it were cast in outer space?
You see how fast?
Could be
How
confused.
fast? If you didn't have any wind resistance, how fast could you make a fly line go, turn over?
Well, wouldn't it depend on the level of energy you put into the cast?
But
But there's no
Versus-
resistance.
there's no air
Right.
resistance. So the potential is
The
speed of
launch
light,
speed. Oh,
okay?
Wow.
Yeah. So it really has a major impact, and air resistance, believe it or not, as it goes faster is what makes it go gentle. It's one of those things you go, but it's true. So here, this is a line with very little front taper, and you get one of these kicking situations where it goes over like this. And while the taper line, you get this smooth, gentle delivery. This is gonna flop it right down in the water. This is gonna be a nice, gentle presentation. That's the most important thing when you're trying to do a gentle presentation. It is not whether it's a double taper or a weight forward. Again, short taper, delayed mass reduction, delayed acceleration, less energy dissipation, more power. A longer taper is going to have an earlier mass reduction, earlier acceleration, more and earlier energy dissipation, so you end up ultimately with less power and more delicacy. I know I've made this point about 12 times, but it's just hard for people sometimes to understand that. So, any questions on that? Anybody believe me?
Sure.
Couple? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the importance of profile and taper. So that long taper, we said, gives you a delicate turnover. And this is a line with a long taper. And this is a line with a short front taper. So this is going to give you powerful turnover, okay? So this is what you want to do if you have a small dry fly. You got a 24 atoms and on a 12-foot leader, and you want to lay that out there nice and easy. That's the kind of tip you want on your fly line. Now, let's say you're fishing for browns and you're throwing streamers to the bank. You want a short taper like this so it can turn over that streamer. Okay? You got a 4-foot straight leader, maybe, in that streamer. And then you've got some of these, you can't see it too well, but this actually comes here and then expands out and comes down. And what that does is it puts more weight at the tip. Okay? And there's a couple reasons for that. One is to turn over big flies. The more mass you have that you slow down, the easier it's going to be to turn over a big fly. But also, in certain circumstances, you don't have very much fly line out, and you need to get weight in that line. And like nymphing, for instance, so you need to have that weight front-loaded. There's also the situation where you have weight in the back. This is, anybody spay cast in here? Okay, one. So spay lines are weighted towards the back. And that's so when you come up into your D-loop, there's weight there to load that rod. And so you got more in the back, and it's good for roll cast, spay casting, and mending. Who said the mending before? Yeah. Good for mending. Any questions on those? So let's look at how you might look at fly lines. So this is a several-year-old thing from Scientific Anglers, but all the various textures that they've got, or various technologies that they have. Textures, all kinds of slickness stuff, things. They've got dry tip technology that's supposed to not sink. Yeah, right. Micro balloons for making it float, welded loops, special cores, depending on what you're doing, and sonar, the scientific angler sonar are sinking lines that are designed to sink straight line.
I've got this, what is your interpretation of the shark skin, if you don't mind?
My interpretation of the shark skin. There are other kinds of textured lines that have come out that are much better than shark skin. The problem with shark skin was that it was so rough, it caused
Yeah, it does.
problems on people's hands from stripping, and it made a lot of noise in the guides,
No, that's true.
and that annoyed a lot of people.
If you ever had a tarpon on or something with the shark skin, you might lose your finger.
That's right, and that's why I always wore a protector on my finger when I had them. But textures are very, very good. If you want to get more distance, a texture will help you because there's less resistance in the guides as the fly line is shooting out. And shark skin was actually excellent at that, but it had the problem with really being loud and also hurting people's
So what did they
hands.
replace it with?
So now they have the mastery texture,
Oh, okay.
okay?
'Cause I got
And
shark
then-
skin, and I loved it, but I had to fight through this stuff. And
Yeah. And then the other airflow has got linear ones.
All right?
Yeah, so they don't make quite as much noise.
Well, I got used to it after a while.
But they, Rio doesn't have any textured lines. What's his face doesn't think they're important.
So the principal value of the texture line is what, just if you don't mind?
Predominantly, it is decreased friction so you can
Right.
shoot further.
Okay,
But also, if you keep your lines clean, they float better. If you don't, they float worse.
oh, okay. And so the problem is when you're drawing it back in, it's going contrary to the shape of the line, the texture.
What?
Cuts your, yeah, the ridges are coming back at you.
No.
I don't know, I never had a problem.
No.
So the ridges aren't in a direction.
No,
They're
they're
not?
just,
No, it's just
It's just
bumps.
over, oh, it's
just
randomized.
bumps, yeah.
Oh, I got it wrong. Okay, perfect, thanks.
Not like the picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, these are some of the SA fly lines, and these prices are probably a little out of date, but the more technology you add to it, the more it's gonna cost.
oh yeah, but every year they modify the frickin' thing so they can ding you another. You know, you take those shark skin lines like I have, they come out like 89 bucks. 3 years later, they're 40 bucks. Then they come out with something else, and then it drops down again, you know? I mean, they just play games with this stuff to be able to, like cars,
Yep,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know. So you buy one, you might as well just, if you like that line, wait another year and it'll drop about 40%.
And on that same line, the rod makers do the same thing.
Exactly.
So if you're really hot on the rods, try different lines, and you can buy a $100 line instead of a $1,000 fly rod. So anyway, the more technology you have, the more expensive it's gonna be. So, know your fly line. Go to their website, and they give a lot of information. Some of it is very objective. Some of it is subjective. Oh, this is the greatest line since, sliced bread. And some of it is bull. Be careful to make sure that the weights they refer to are the 30 feet or the entire head. Sometimes they'll give you the weight of the entire head rather than the 30 feet, which has got, there's no problems with that, you just have to know what you're looking at. And remember, those graphics that they show, they're cartoons, they're not engineering diagrams. And finally, read reviews with a very large grain of salt. People have preferences for a particular manufacturer or whatever, so you have to decide what you like. And you know what? You're never wrong. If you like it, that's all that counts, right? Okay, so I talked about the new fly lines, have got listed on them what their name and all that is. I know people who keep Excel spreadsheets of all their fly lines. I don't do that. I keep the boxes from the fly lines and I fold them flat. And so I probably have, I was just looking at them since we just moved not too long ago, and I probably have 30 fly lines. And, you know, those boxes are about that big when they're all collapsed down. So it really doesn't do much. So it doesn't take up much room. Most of the fly lines have little tags, you know, on the reel that they come in, on the spool that they come on, that says the name, and then it's got a little thing, you can take the little tag off, you can stick that on your reel so you know what it is. Say what?
I wish I'd done that, I just bought a bunch of, threw out the boxes, I don't know what I did with them.
Yeah.
Can you take, where can you take them and re-identify them?
You have to start over there, Mark.
Yeah, I
New
guess
line.
so.
So what you can do, you know, it depends on how old they are. If they're still on their website, then you can look at the colors, and you can weigh the first 30 feet, which is really tough.
I've done that.
Yeah. That's okay, you can put them just back with, you know, slip knots.
No, I just hold the 30 feet in my hand, I get on the scale.
Take it off.
Take it off, get on the scale.
That works really well.
Yeah.
Just don't spit or take a deep breath between getting on and off. So, and our goal today is not to identify a specific fly line, but an approach to selecting lines. Okay, this is an Orvis line, this is the Hydros. It is a classic line, it fits the criteria. It's got a 30-foot head. The belly of the head is about 31 feet. It's got a 6-foot front taper, which is a pretty good long taper. So this would be a good line for presentation of a dry fly.
Which direction is your front of that line?
This is the running line here, so this is
Yeah,
the
it's
front.
yeah, it's reverse, yeah. what we're showing you.
To your left.
Yeah.
And you can see there's a lot of stuff in here, you know. And they'll list all the neat stuff that makes it cost more, like HD texturing. So this is their version of texturing, their follow-on to shark's skin. They put an ID on it. The reason they do that, Scientific Anglers puts ID on their fly lines. Why would Orvis do that? Orvis owns them. What's
They
interesting,
own them.
huh?
They own.
Owns who?
Scientific England?
They own Scientific Anglers, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They bought them 7 or 8 years ago. But they've kept them as separate lines because people, you know how we are. We get something we like, and even though it's the same thing with somebody else, we just like it better. Integrated slickness, that's a slick term, isn't it? Enhanced welded loops. So all these things cost money because they've got to add stuff. Sometimes they have to run it through the machine more than once. Putting welded loops in it takes a couple of extra steps. I mean, I've been told, and I'm sure, that these enhanced loops are really, really expensive to put them in. It's about 50 cents a line, so that takes it from $75 to $100. And then they'll have you your taper chart. So here's the weight here. Makes this in a 3 to an 8. It tells you what the tip width is. And this is important for your leader base. You should be about half of that, or more than half of that width for your leader.
Is that the width or is that the length?
That's the, oh, that's the, you're right, that's the length. That's half a foot. So why do we have half a foot on the end?
When the crack's in there, you can cut it off.
Well, that's right.
That's what I do anyhow.
That's right, you can cut it off and put a fresh leader on it.
Totally screw the nail in it.
Yeah. And now, they've got the loops, so you really don't have to do that as much. It's got the taper, the belly, the rear taper, how much running line, total length, the head length, okay, and the grains at 30 feet. So we're gonna talk here a little while about 3 weights, because they're 100 grains at 30 feet, okay? So if your head length is 45 inches, this is at 30 feet. So we're actually half again as long. So, and when that whole head is out, it's about 150 grains, right? So grain weight at 30 feet is 100, okay? And that's right, 3 weight. For 3 weight, it's 100. But you have a 45-foot head, so 30 feet is 100, 45 is half of that again, right?
Yeah.
So that's 150. So that's somewhere between a 5 and a 6 when you have the entire head out. Does that make sense? I kind of stumbled when I was.
So that's when you're trying to load the rod more, you can sit there and put more line out, and,
Yep,
yep,
That's why you get.
that's why it works.
yeah.
That's why it's hard to load the rod casting. out of
We're
the
back to
boat.
one line again.
So a 3 weight at 30 feet with a 45-foot head is about 150 grains, or a 5-6. See, if I had just brought that up rather than try to stumble through it, till getting old.
So, what is that teaching you? That you can put a 3 weight on, a 5 weight rod, and if you're fishing close, you're gonna have good presentation, but if you need to,
Presentation is going to be related by the distal taper,
okay,
not the weight of the line,
all right.
okay? But it's just going to tell you that at 45 feet, the point I'm trying to make is that these weights vary and they have an impact on the rod, okay? And so at 30 feet, if you had 30 feet of line out, okay? So let's just talk about this. How long a cast would you make with 30 feet of line out? Well, you got a 9-foot rod.
Okay, 50 feet.
Yeah. And how often do you cast 50 feet?
Oh, awful.
Huh?
It's stream often.
On a stream?
Not very often at all.
Yeah, most people don't. Most
In a
people
boat,
don't.
you cast in
Most
maybe
people
20
type,
feet.
40 feet would be.
Yeah.
Now, spey casting, definitely, you might be 100 feet. But, you have to look at that when you're looking at it. How much, you've got 9 feet of fly rod, and then you've got anywhere from 6 to 12 feet of leader. So, add that to your 30 feet, and you're about 50 feet. That make sense? And most people don't cast that far, so it may not be relevant to you. So with 30 feet, 9 foot of rod, and let's say 9 foot of leader, that's 18, 30, that's 48 feet right there. Most people aren't going to be doing that much more than that. Okay,
So why do the manufacturers do that? Is that, why are they adding all that extra? Is that for mending or?
that's part of it. You can't, skinny line won't mend heavy line. So yeah, so you want to have some. But also, if you are casting that far, you're probably going to want to load your rod a little bit more anyway. Okay? And when you cast it out. So what happens is it helps you load your rod to get a farther cast if you're going for a farther distance. Okay, and this is Rio. They're the ones that talk about the non-stretchable core. Now, interesting, airflow back in the 80s came out, they thought it was bad to have stretching core. You know how much a core stretches? Any idea?
Quarter inch.
Huh?
Oh, no.
Well, it depends on.
How much line you got out, it could be
Yeah,
several
the function
feet.
of
Well,
line.
it's about 30%. Okay, so whatever you've got out, you can increase it by 30%, stretch it. So they thought that wasn't good, you weren't able to pick up the strikes and stuff. So they used Kevlar. Okay?
No strength.
Now, Kevlar is a wonderful material. Doesn't stretch at all. But it's also kind of a weird material, and you can't get plastic to stick to it too well. So when they came out with these Kevlar cord fly lines, they had a couple of problems. One is the coating wouldn't stay on the core. And the other is, since the core wouldn't stretch, you couldn't get rid of the coils. When you stretch a line, you have to have the core and the coating stretch at the same time. If they're not stretching together, when you do that, you may stretch the coating, but you're not going to stretch the core. And if it's not adhering well to the core anyway, you end up separating your line.
I had one of those old ones, and you couldn't hardly cast them after about a year.
Yeah, they just got,
Yep.
So is that why I can't get the kink out of my running line on my, that reel line I've got?
so, what do we got
The
here?
new one, they're better.
But when I got stretch the shit out.
So here we got a 5-weight. And this is the floating, the full head is 185 grains, right? It's a 5-weight, so 5 weights should weigh 140. But this weighs 185, so it's a 7-weight, right? The head length is 33 feet. And look, it's got a kind of a bulbous area here. Now, why would they do this?
Taking short gas.
Yep, that's exactly right. You don't have to have a lot of line out to be able to load your rod. Also, if you've got something that you would like to turn over, like a nymph rig, you know, you got a couple of nymphs and some lead and a bobber. Oh, I mean a strike indicator. What are they thinking? Well, how far do you normally cast a nymph rig? Well, we're 25-foot cast, okay? 25 feet minus the 9-foot rod, minus 3-foot leader to indicator is 13 feet of fly line. So you gotta have that weight up front to be able to load your rod. So a short front taper with a large mass turns over big nymph rigs. That make sense? Oops. What happened here? Okay.
That's one of the drawbacks with the Rio indicator line. It's so fat, you can't put them on your reels that all the other lines used to work on.
Oh, really? I
And
usually,
it's really a
yeah, it's
heavy line.
yeah, it's a big line.
Is it in diameter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
So, chicken on a chain.
Is that the one that's colored?
That's what that is, casting a
Yeah.
chicken on a chain.
So it's, the color changes, so you know what.
It's got like an orange tip on
So this is their power fly, which has got even a more aggressive distal bulbous area. So a 7-weight weighs 197 grams, and that's at 30 feet, okay? So that is somewhere between a 7 and an 8. And it has a head of about 40 feet. So it's going to be somewhere north of 8. But you're going to be able to turn stuff over, and you're going to be able to cast with short amount of line out. So this would be very comparable to the other one, to the one we just talked about, the indicator. But this would be, this one was, this kind of goes back to the thing about changing things all the time. So these lines are relatively similar, you know, configuration, short taper, bulbous tip. And one they're doing for nymphs, and the other is more for streamers. Well, pretty much the same thing.
Mhm.
Now, sometime, you know, we were talking before about the length of the head overloading or giving you more weight to load your rod. And there's certain situations, like shooting heads, where you may have a very short head with a lot of weight in it. Anybody have a bank shot?
I've got a commando head,
Okay,
and which is great for casting, but I don't know how to do it the other way.
oh yeah.
Single
So,
hand spade, that's,
the thing about these really short heads is that you can't false cast them.
no,
They are boom.
that's right.
It's like a spinning rod.
Yeah, just like, well, really, just like throwing a plastic plug.
The good part is you don't need any back cast hardly at all, and you don't wear yourself out because it
Yeah.
just goes.
Yeah.
And
I-
circle cast works on it.
Yeah, circle cast works on these. I've got one of these and it's just, you know, 70 feet. It's just really, really nice.
The only problem I've had though is sometimes it just splats down. I mean, it's not a gentle,
No, it's not a gentle, and it
No.
doesn't have that big a,
So you have a so this is based on the line, Clarence, yours is just a commando head with a running line, right?
Yeah,
So you just clip yours onto your running line.
the commando head is just one
Just
level
the head.
line.
Yeah, so
Like,
you got,
it's
Clarence,
only
you got
like 12
14 and a
feet
half,
long
you
or
got the
13 feet.
Yeah, it's 13 feet, but then you always have to have some kind of head on the end of it,
Yeah.
right, tip on it.
Yeah,
which actually is where the taper comes in.
Yeah,
yeah. Without that, it's really brutal.
yeah, really plump.
Yeah, throwing rocks.
Okay.
Mhm.
This is
That one.
wavelength, I think I can't remember if this is the
That
new
was
one or
crazy.
not, the
It's
MPX.
windy and stuff.
Is that the new one? Did they just,
I always figured that
I think
had
it's
action to the fly.
MPA or something, but now that it's this. This is Scientific Anglers, and again, this is another one of these that has a bulbous head, and it's got a relatively long head length in the higher ranges, and it is overweighted, so it's good for throwing. It's really kind of in between some of those others, so you could do a streamer and you could do a not too gentle dry fly presentation
Like
with
a
it.
salmon fly.
Yeah, salmon. But you could, you know, you could do a small streamer woolly bugger or something like that with that, but still be able to do dry flies.
We used to take the regular trout tapers on the Yakima in the fall and cut part of the taper off so we could throw those big grasshopper patterns.
Yeah, so
And get them
basically,
turned over,
yeah, basically what you're doing is you just shorten that front taper.
yeah.
Okay, now, so this is a different kind of line. The weight is at the back of the head. Okay, so when you're roll casting, okay, you've got your rod up like this, and then the weight is right here. Okay, right here. It's not down here. And so this weight then loads your rod better when you go forward with your roll cast or your single hand spay. Or anybody use single hand spay in here?
I've been trying, but it's not,
I attempted.
I need a lot of help.
Well,
I'll talk to you later.
Okay, that's it's really one of my loves.
Good.
It's a requirement on the sock. If you're gonna fish the sock, you have to figure out how to do
It's
it.
some way to keep them, no back cast, yeah.
Right.
Excuse me. So this is really good for roll cast and particularly for single hand spay.
You want some water?
Sure.
Bill, when you single hand spade, what kind of casting distances are you expecting?
Well, I had to be able to do 65 feet for the master's test.
Oh, that's,
How about a Diet Coke?
That'll work. Great, thank you. Okay.
So on that picture, the anchor point is actually where your leader and everything is.
Yeah, this is your, right here. That's your, where the nail knot is. When you're, the whole thing, all of this, your fly, your leader, and a couple of feet of fly line are your anchor. Okay?
That's it.
Now, the fly and the leader really don't do much. It's this couple of feet of fly line that is really the important part of the
So when you make the D-loop, you only want a couple of feet of fly line actually on the water.
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
Could be our problem.
And yet, so you want your,
More than that.
you want your anchor to be at about a 45-degree angle off from you, somewhere between 1 and 1.5 fly rods away,
Mhm.
okay?
So a 45-degree angle, sort of?
Yes, so out like this, a 45-degree angle, 1 to 1.5 fly rod lengths away,
Oh.
and it should be pointing the direction you're casting. So one of the problems that people have when they're doing a single hand spade, is they come, first of all, they do this, but they come around and the anchor is pointing this way, and they try to cast this way.
Oh, right.
The anchor has to be pointing the way you're casting. The best thing you can do if you want to improve your single hand spade, first of all, slow down. Lift slow, come around, and accelerate through the entire thing. But watch your anchor and practice putting your anchor in front of you, practice putting it behind you, practice putting it right next to you so that you know what it takes to do all those
But
things.
that's always on water. It doesn't work on grass at all.
No,
It doesn't, yeah. And you can't practice.
If moving water is better than lake water?
no, it depends on
Yeah,
where you're
It's
doing
resistance.
it.
okay.
Well, okay, you said
Find out this weekend.
in front of you, to the side, and to the back. Is that, are you setting it there in those different locations to get different results? Okay, what would be the differences?
Okay, so if you're setting it further in front of you,
Okay,
you're not gonna have as big a loop, right, a D loop,
okay,
so you're not gonna be able to cast as far, but if you're right up against rocks,
that's
you
where.
won't have as much
Right,
behind you.
right.
If it's further back, then you can have more line up, you might be able to load a little bit further and get it
Okay.
out. But optimally, it's about 45 degrees off from you to the front,
Okay.
okay?
What, so, in a simple-minded notion, so the parry poke is essentially a cast that sets it in front of you to make sure you're away from everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
It's just, the parry poke is essentially another waterborne anchor to take.
but, yeah, but he locates it that way, so he gets, he doesn't get any trouble. You never get into trouble with branch, I found that I was doing it, I'm trying to evaluate what I did, but I used the parry poke against a really dense bunch of brush and trees that were coming onto the bank and into the water.
Behind you.
And I did the parry poke and it worked like a charm, I was wondering what I did.
You just kept it out in front of you.
Yeah, I kept it in front of me.
Okay. Now, different approach to the same problem. Both of these are salmon steelhead type fly lines. This is from Rio, and this is from Scientific Anglers. Now, this may look familiar from what we've just been talking about. It kind of looks like the single hand spade line. Weight's back here, and it has a relatively low mass distal part with a front taper. The Scientific Angler one has got kind of a bulbous head, but it's got a really long rear taper on this. And so what can happen,
Looks like the one on the top.
if you can mend with this, so you've got this out here, And you can mend with that, because you have to have heavy line to mend the line in front of it, right? And the same here, you've still got some meat to this line here, so you can also mend this. This one might mend a little bit better, okay?
When you say better, you mean easier?
You can call it whatever you want. You can mend better, because it's got some weight it can pull over.
You can actually do it.
Yeah, you can actually do it. Now, another thing though is look at the difference. So this has got a long, thin head here. This got a fat one. So which one are you gonna throw big, hairy, woolly things with?
One on the
The
lower.
lower.
The lower one, that's right. You're gonna need that head there to be able to turn it over. This one's not gonna be able to turn over big, heavy flies. So what they're doing is basically, they've got two approaches to the same problem. That is being able to throw out a long cast and be able to mend it, depending upon the
Which one is gonna present the fly gentler?
this one,
But you don't really
Which
care
one?
when you're fishing for
I didn't
steelhead.
see where you
the
put.
top one, the top one. But again, yeah, you don't care.
You're chucking big old flies out there and then sweeping them.
Well, or maybe you're gonna be skating or, you
Yeah.
know, something like that.
They generally aren't rising.
Yeah. Okay, so how do I pick a line? Whoops. Pick line profiles that fit the kind of fishing you wanna do. What kind of rod you gonna be using? You know, you're gonna be using a soft rod or a fast rod. You don't wanna overweight a soft rod because it's gonna get real soft. You don't wanna underweight a fast rod because it's gonna get, you're not gonna be able to load it. How far are you gonna cast? You know, you're gonna cast 20 feet. You know, all you need is 11 foot of something out in front of your, the tip of your rod. So you don't need very much, so you need weight in the tip. Because you gotta remember that you got fly line and leader. You got leader and rod length that's gonna be taking up part of that 20 feet. What kind of rig you gonna be casting? You can be doing dry flies, you can be doing streamers. Now you can check out their manufacturers to find out, their websites to find out what profile to use. Oh, I'm gonna go back here. Oh, I'm having some problems today. Now, the best way to pick it is to use it on your rod. Before you go out and buy that line, find out if anybody else in the club has got, oh, do you have an MPX that I can try? And do that on your rod, because it's gonna be different on your rod than it is on something else, okay? So borrow friends' lines and use it on your rod, and then practice it with, on your rod until you get the feel of it. And you'll be able to get a lot more out of your fly lines if you do that. In summary, skinny line can't move heavy line. Fly lines are standard dies, but rods aren't. Long front tips present gently. Heavy tips turn over hardware. Longer heads tend to cast farther because you can carry more line in false casting, except shooting heads where you don't false cast. Read the literature, look at the diagrams. Some companies solve the same problem in different ways. You need to look at that diagram and see how it fits to your fishing. And before you buy a line, try it out on your rod with the tackle you plan to use. Don't just take and put, oh, I'm gonna see how this is gonna work for streamers. You know, and go ahead and put a little tuft of yarn on a leader and throw it out there. That's not what you wanna do. You know, you wanna take and put a streamer on that to see how it's gonna work. Okay, any questions?
Great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Bill, that's fine.